Methodology of Humanities, Module 3, Narration and Representation. Text and Textuality. We have already seen two modes of thinking, the narrative mode of thinking and the logico-scientific mode of thinking, and what are the differences between the two, and why a narrative mode of thinking is relevant, important. In this section, we talk about the structure of a narrative with respect to text and textuality. Narratology or narrative theory is a study and analysis of narrative texts. We come across different kind of narratives. Largely we distinguish between three kinds of narrative texts. Literary narratives, you have historical narratives, and philosophical narratives. These would be discussed in the next session. Now, narrative theory is about the analysis of narrative texts and also about the study of the structure of a narrative text. Something that is important here is the word called diegesis. What is diegesis? Diegetic narrative or diegesis refers to telling or explaining an event by the narrator. This differs from what we usually know as mimetic art, which is to show an event rather than explain it. Unlike mimetic art, which enacts something, diegesis gives a detailed description of characters or a particular experience. So diegesis, you actually explain a certain event rather than showing it. Now coming to the structure of a narrative. A narrative can be understood in terms of three constituent parts. One is the text, second the teller, and third the reader. Coming to text and textuality. What is a text? Okay. A text is not something that is printed alone. You don't call printed materials alone text. It is any piece of spoken or written language. It may either be something that consists of just one word, okay, or it could be something of considerable length. It could be a video or audio clip. It could be a novel. It could be a film. All these could be referred to as texts. It is, in other words, a text is a series of words put together to create some kind of a coherence. A cultural object or media artifact from which meaning can be extracted is called a text. Culture can be a text for that matter. or a screenshot that you take for a specific purpose can be considered as a text. So, anything that is taken and from which meaning can be extracted for a specific purpose is called a text. Now, the term text is derived from the Latin word textus, which means a tissue, and texere, which means to weave. In this specific context, text means to produce meaning, largely. Texts have the capacity to enable and exceed the production of meaning. Julia Kristeva, a French critic, would call this ability of the text to produce meanings as the text's productivity. There is a need for a text to be taken outside, or there is a need to understand text outside literary studies as something that constitutes not, something that is in printed form, but that appears in several other forms. It should be understood as something, not something that is printed alone, but anything from which meaning can be extracted. Now, a text has come to be understood in various ways through the years. New critics and post-structuralists, for example, view texts differently. The new critics argue that texts are self-contained, that text has a meaning within it, which is fixed. New criticism was a movement in literary theory that dominated American criticism in the 1940s. This mode of reading encouraged a close reading of texts in the belief that the meaning of a text was or could be found within the text, and thereby a close reading of the text would suffice to understand what a particular text meant. The movement derived its name from a book called The New Criticism, written by John Crowe Ransom, published in 1941. It enabled a politically independent reading of a text where any role of the reader, any intention of the author, any historical autobiographical contexts were considered unnecessary to understand a text. According to new critics, one needed to know only formal aspects like rhyme, meter, the setting, plot, characterization, paradoxes, ambiguity, irony, etc. So all these formal aspects. Once you know the formal aspects of a text, it meant that you actually understand what that particular text meant. This mode of analysis presented the text as a coherent, fixed entity whose meaning was always within it. But by the late 1960s, this tradition of criticism was largely, or this tradition of understanding a text as self-contained, this tradition was contested by structuralist and post-structuralist theories of the text. Works like The Death of the Author by Roland Barthes in 1968 and Structure, Sign and Play in the Discourse of the Human Sciences by Jacques Derrida in 1966, tried to understand the text in another way. Understanding the formal aspects of a text was no longer sufficient to understand what a particular text meant, because texts often borrow from other texts, adopt from other texts, and allude to literary, political, and historical traditions and contexts in order to reach or in order to mean something. And neither does a text have a fixed meaning. Depending on the reader's way of approaching a text might mean different things. A text, according to these theorists, was an endless play of meanings, where the author did not have any final authority over the meaning. There was no such thing as, an original text. Rather, there was a trajectory of literary history to which any writer, for that matter, would go back to, either knowingly or unknowingly. Roland Barthes distinguishes between a work and a text. According to him, work is a physical printed book, while text is a narrative. A work becomes a text when the reader reads it, dealing with the language and narrative. Text, according to Barthes, is a tissue of citations rather than something that is very original, coming from a writer who is a genius. Texts take stories from other works, has allusion to earlier authors. Every literary narrative is made up of several other narratives. There can be no original work or a genius author who produces a very original work. Also, the idea or the gap between fiction and fact also starts overlapping. One cannot say that autobiography is completely factual, or that a novel is completely fictional. Another term which is of importance here is called intertextuality. This was first discussed by Julia Kristeva, who states that no text is self-born. All texts relate to one another and transcend the bounds of itself. Neither is there any one way of reading a text. Relationality to other texts is important to understand a text. Gerard Genette also discusses a similar concept in his book called Palimpsests, where he identifies several such relationalities that one can find in a text. Lastly, he distinguishes between 5 kinds of relationality, which are paratextuality, hypertextuality, architextuality, intertextuality, and metatextuality. Now, what is paratextuality? Paratextuality marks those elements which lie on the threshold of a particular text and which helps direct and control the reception of a text by its readers. So largely paratextuality is those elements that help a reader through a particular text or to understand a particular text. It consists of two parts, which is peritext and epitext. Peritext would include things like the titles, chapter titles, preface, etc. While epitext includes interviews given by the author about a particular work or that particular text. Then reviews that have come about in various newspapers, journals about that particular text. Then letters, private letters, editorials, discussions about that particular text. All these constitute what is called epitext. So peritext and epitext together are called paratext. Paratextuality, it performs various functions which guide the reader through the text. Second is hypertextuality. Hypertextuality again is the relationship between one text to an anterior text, or it is the relationship between the hypertext to an anterior text, which is called a hypotext, and which the former transforms or modifies. That is a hypotext which the hypertext modifies. The word hyper is a Greek word which means above, beyond, outside, etc. So hypertext or hypertextuality means a text that refers to something beyond it. Something that is beyond it in order to reach its present meaning or sense. The earlier text is hypotext and the latter one is hypertext. For instance, you have White Sargasso Sea by Jean Rye, which becomes a hypotext to the novel Jane Eyre, which was written earlier. The third one is architextuality, which is the relationship between a text to another text belonging to the same genre. Coming to the fourth kind of relationality, which is intertextuality. Intertextuality is the shaping of a text's meaning by another text, by way of allusion to another text, by way of quotations from other texts and authors, by way of translation, by way of parody, etc. Contesting any notion of a purely original text. Borrowing and transformation of a prior text and incorporation of aspects of the prior text in a new text, etc. Could be considered as examples of intertextual influences. Coming to the final relationality, metatextuality, where a text makes comments about another. It looks at how a text changes or expands on the content of another text. It provingly comments on what it is, it comments on what it is doing. It calls the reader's attention to the process of its own creation. Okay, a text which calls the attention of the reader to the process of its own creation, constantly interpreting what it is doing. Meta text constantly interprets what it is doing. A text that reminds the reader that it is a text, that the reader is holding an actual book in their hands. So that is what metatextuality does. So these are the 5 forms of relationality which is there in a text according to Janet. So this is regarding the textuality or text, that is one constituent element of a narrative. Other 2 elements, the teller and the reader, will be discussed in the next section.